Professor David Blustein, who is an outstanding scholar in the field of counseling psychology, especially in the field of career counseling, but in the whole field of counseling psychology, you are someone of reference, a figure of reference, I'm sure. And Professor David Blustein we are here with Professor Joaquim Armando Ferreira, who will be, Professor Blustein will be giving a conference that you are here to participate in. And Professor Joaquim Armando, who has an extensive collaboration with Professor David Blustein all over, 20 or more years, will be moderating the conference and will be presenting whatever he thinks about Professor David Blustein. I just want to say that Professor Blustein is a professor now at Boston College in the United States of America. He has a very innovative work on counseling psychology, namely psychology of working, a new theory that he has been working on all over the years and innovating, and you'll be talking about exactly psychology of working, a theory of change for a new era. And he has other important books, Psychology of Working, New Perspective for Career Development, Counseling and Public Policy, and The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, The Eroding Experience of Work in America, and the Oxford Handbook on the Psychology of Working, along with many articles in reference publications in the area of counseling psychology and psychology in general. He has a Leona Tyler Award from the American Psychology Association and other awards. Joaquim Armando will be talking about it. So it's a really very important and it's an honor for us to have you among us and to have accepted to give this conference and to give a talk on Friday. And also, I want to thank you in public for having participated in the first jury, in the jury of the first edition of the Luisa Morgado Award. Thank you for your important collaboration. You will be talking about your work. I think everyone here knows you quite well. They came here to hear you. So, David, I hope that the collaboration that you have been having with our institution for more than 30 years, 32 years, will continue in the near future. It's also, from a personal point of view, very important to have you here once I know you for 32 years now. So it's also an honor for me and a great pleasure personally from me. So I will give you the stage, David, I don't know if you want to say some words, Joaquim.
Yes, I don't have really any. I will say a few words, but I am not going to talk about your awards. You had all of them. So, and the last one was the most important award of the American Psychological Association. So, I mean, if you had the top, means that you had the other ones down. Okay. So, thank you, David. And I will moderate, and I will go down.
If you need anything, please.
Here we go. Boa tarde. Paula, Joaquim, it's a tremendous honor to be here. If I talk about it too much, I'll get very emotional. But I have known these folks for 32 years, also Eduardo Santos for 32 years. And I have to say that coming back here, I've been to Coimbra, I think this is my 14th visit. But I haven't been here in 9 years, and coming back has been so profoundly meaningful. And my experience of feeling the warmth and kindness hasn't changed from my first visit in 1993. If anything, it's become even warmer and kinder. So what I'm going to do today is to give you a tour of psychology of working, the perspective and framework that I developed, and then the theory that I developed in collaboration with some of my colleagues. I'm going to do this because I know that at least one person has heard this talk, probably Joachim is number two. I have made some changes in it. I have some new ideas at the end about directions that I think this body of work should go in. And in addition, I have added some artistic features to this talk. One of them is a literary feature of having what I call the Coimbra thread going through the presentation. And then I have a musical interlude halfway through per request of Professor Joaquim Ferreira. So let me begin. Okay. Oh, just one other point. I'm not going to get too personal on this. The article that Paola posted on Facebook is a kind of personal memoir. After receiving the Leona Tyler Award, I was given a 1-hour time at the APA convention to present. So if you're interested in anything about my life, that article will include it. The only thing I'm going to say now is that unfortunately I injured my leg 3 months ago. The only reason I'm telling you is at some point I may need to sit down and continue the talk from there. It's not that I'm getting bored. And I tell my students, because I also have to sit down there, that I will be as exciting or unexciting, sitting or standing, okay? But I think I could handle this okay. So let me just go over a little bit about who I am. This is a picture of me from the mid-1970s. If I did become a rock musician, which was one of my first career goals, that might have been the cover of my album. But of course, that didn't happen. I had a different trajectory and a great opportunity to do what I do now. I feel incredibly privileged. I grew up in Queens, New York. When I say I'm from New York City, people have this idea of me living in the Upper West Side of Greenwich Village. Where I grew up was by car, 45 minutes to an hour from Manhattan. By public transportation, an hour and a half. But it was still part of New York City. It was an amazing place to grow up. So for me, working was something that I experienced as an issue because my people in my parents' generation did not have an easy time working. And my father particularly struggled for a number of years to kind of get his footing after serving in World War II. And finally, in 1960, got a job, a very stable job with Pan American Airlines as a sheet metal mechanic. And there's a lot about work that I learned from my parents and from their peers. And those themes are manifested in psychology of working. Also developed a deep interest in music and politics. Both of these aspects of life still inform me. I became a counseling psychologist in 1985 after becoming a master's level counselor, where I worked in 3 local colleges in the New York area for about 6 or 7 years. And another important part of my life is my relational context. I have 2 daughters, 4 stepdaughters, and 6 grandkids, and an amazing partner and wife who will be here a little bit later. And this photo on the bottom, I kind of have this thing that we shouldn't forget about the pandemic, in large measure because we shouldn't forget the people who passed away during the pandemic. But I think this photo of me, like in the first few months, when we wore masks outside, if you remember that, I think it's important to remember it, so I like to put this photo up. A big part of my life is to give back to the world. I come from a blue-collar family, but I have had a lot of privileges, and I'm aware of the privileges I've had of really good education, really supportive parents, and I have felt the desire to give back to the world, and through teaching, through mentoring, through counseling work that I do now, as well as through my research and writing. So let's begin by thinking about the role of work in psychological health and well-being. Freud, as we know, a lot of us know who studied psychology know that Freud wrote that to work and to love are the hallmarks of mental health. And my view is that when work is decent and dignified, it can really give us a very rich life of meaning. And, but at the same time, work can involve denigration and pain, the kind of experiences that my parents went through. My mother worked in a department store and had to stand on her feet all day long. And one day a week she had to work 12 hours and would only have like a half hour off for one break, for 2 breaks. And the rule in our apartment where I grew up was when Mom comes home, just run the bath and like stay out of her way. She's an amazing human being. Okay, so I'm actually very interested in the vulnerability of working. And in the book that I wrote in 2019, The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, we interviewed about 60 people across the United States. And it was this book is really both a kind of policy-based book, it's a kind of trade book. It was written in a more accessible way than a traditional academic book. So we have interview vignettes. This particular vignette, I think, captures a lot of what working can be and what happens when working disappears or becomes compromised. And this was a person who I didn't interview, one of my graduate students did, who was a person who ran a record studio in a city in the Northeast. And this was in the mid-90s, he describes this. I surmise that, if you read this to yourself, I will read it shortly, that he had an incident, a car accident, I think it was a DUI, and he ended up serving jail time. And I'll read this to you. I felt like a failure in that I wasn't able to change and market myself well or adjust to the changes in the recording industry. This was an emotional and mental impact on me that hit me, and it happened to be at the same time that my ex-wife, it was his wife at the current time, was having an affair, so the divorce was impending, the bankruptcy was impending, and my decision-making was deteriorating, and that's what led to my car accident and prison eventually. That was probably the darkest time in my life because of all my identities in my work, and my marriage, and both things were failing, my twin towers were falling apart. And here I also feel like we need to remember the people who died. So many people, of course, died in horrible ways, and the people who died in this 9/11 incident, of course, suffered terribly. So I use this as a metaphor in my book, that these twin towers stood up. They were put up in Lower Manhattan. And actually, I remember when I worked as a messenger during one of the summers in college, I was a delivery person. Before faxes, before email, I would deliver letters and things. And I would go to the World Trade Center, and not all the floors were done yet. So sometimes the elevator would stop, and you knew not to get out. There was nothing there. So I saw these buildings being built. So like the Twin Towers, I think that our dedication to work and also our dedication to relationships are two places in life where we make ourselves very vulnerable. We put ourselves out there. And so like these towers which can reach to great heights and help people to move into some different kind of architectural or entrepreneurial world, also relationships and work can cause us a lot of pain, especially when things don't work out well. So I always go back to that participant who I called Marco in the book, and think he had an amazing, that vignette says so much about what the kind of work that I've been doing for 25 years. So why develop a different theory and paradigm? When I first came here to Coimbra in 1994, I was not thinking about psychology of working yet. I was doing work on school-to-work transition. I was not in the mindset that I would develop a new theory. I thought that it would be nice to, but I didn't have the ideas formulated. And over that period, from like the mid-90s to around 2000, I started to percolate these ideas that the field of career development was very limited and very circumscribed, And a lot of you who are in this field now have entered a field with a very strong social justice perspective, a racial justice perspective, an activist perspective. That wasn't the prevailing view 30 years ago. It was much more of a middle-class kind of idea of like working with people who had some degree of choice. I think things here, again, the Coimbra connection, is I realized that vocational psychology and career counseling have been critical in Portugal because of these decision points that people reach, like in 9th grade, and then making a decision about going to university and then which faculty to go to. In the US, things were a little bit more amorphous, less structured. So the idea of psychology of working was to develop a theory that would relate to everybody, regardless of their level of choice. I also felt like there was an overly circumscribed view on careers as opposed to work more broadly. That idea was put out there by Mary C. Richardson in 1993, a friend and colleague and a great influence to me. I also felt like we needed to focus on changing systems, not just having people adjust to the world. And we needed a theory that would connect to other ideas. And I had felt that vocational psychology was too isolated, too circumscribed. So psychology of working theory was really constructed on the shoulders of others. There were many people, I wouldn't say there were many people, but there were very important people critiquing the career development discourse when I was a graduate student and when I started out my academic career. Some of them include my colleague from Boston College, Janet Helms, one of the most important racial identity scholars, really, of the last 50 years. Edmund Gordon, who wrote a chapter in 1974 that I read and was so moved by. It was really about disenfranchised individuals and career guidance. And I understand from a friend of his, another colleague of mine, A.J. Franklin, Ed Gordon is still alive at 102. L.C. Smith, who wrote some really landmark articles and chapters on racial injustice and social class issues in the early 80s. And then there's the whole group of people who developed the feminist perspectives of vocation and work. And also some of these people were some of the most innovative feminist scholars within psychology, and I would say even in the broader public intellectual context. Nancy Betts, Lenore Harmon, are the two that I think of. Gail Hackett, I know a lot of my colleagues know them and have also been really influenced by them. Then we have, of course, a social justice movement within psychology for many years. And I was also very influenced by the work of Isaac Prelitensky, who I also have become friends with, who developed this emancipatory communitarian perspective in psychology. And the article that he wrote really started with the last bullet point, that psychology is not value-free, that everything we do reflects values. Even if you think you're neutral, that's a value as well. So Prelitensky's work was really pivotal in my thinking. So a timeline for the psychology of working. 2001, I wrote an article for the 25th anniversary of Journal of Vocational Behavior on the psychology of working. The article was not fully fleshed, the ideas weren't fully fleshed out. If you read the article now, you would say, yeah, David's right, his ideas weren't fully fleshed out. But it was a way to get the ideas out there. And then I started working on this book, The Psychology of Working, which took 5 years to write. And it took 5 years also because life happens while you're trying to write a book, and I had a demanding job, demanding kids, complicated life. But this book, for me, has always been an anchor in my life, and it's an achievement that I feel incredibly proud of, that in these 300 plus pages, I put out these ideas of psychology of working. The other aspects of this book were that I really was interested in looking at lived experience of work. I'm interested in empirical research, but I feel like when psychology focuses only on qualitative or quantitative empirical research, we lose something in the process. And this is what Joachim was reminding me, that I was able to use Bruce Springsteen lyrics in this book, which was actually a shock because it's really hard to get permission to use people's material. I had to get permissions, signed permissions. And somehow I did it, and they hardly charged me any money at all. The publisher gave me a small amount of money, and I was able to pay for this. And it was really like $300 to use like as many lyrics as I wanted. I don't think that would happen now. I think that started out because I actually wrote to Bruce Springsteen's lawyers asking if he would consider writing the foreword to the book. That probably took a little bit of nerve on my part. But they actually responded and said, send us, a review, a few pages, and they said our client has read it, thinks it's a good project, but it doesn't have the time to do it. So that was amazing. And I think that's why they gave me this lower fee. So in 2011, so after this book came out in 2006, 2011, I wrote a relational theory of working, and then in 2016, the psychology of working theory came out. That theory was really kind of born in Coimbra, and I'm going to develop that theme. So there's a number of assumptions of psychology of working, but these are the 4 that I think are really pivotal. Work is a central aspect of life and of mental health. We really should be studying the work life of everybody who works and who wants to work. Work and non-work experiences are seamlessly intertwined. And I've been a psychologist, a therapist for 35 years, and I've always thought about ways to integrate mental health and career interventions. In fact, I'm working on a project now with Joaquim Ferreira is on, well, we'll talk about it later, where we are integrating work and mental health. And work occurs both in marketplace and caregiving contexts. So one of the key aspects of the initial formulations of psychology of working is that working optimally can fulfill 3 clusters of needs. This is not the first taxonomy of the needs that working can fulfill. There were others that were out there at the time, and I integrated them, and cited them, of course, and integrated them into what I felt was a more parsimonious set of ideas. So the first one is the need for survival and power. This seems obvious, common sense, that primarily we work in order to survive. In the career development literature of the 1980s and 90s, and I think my colleagues who go back to that point would agree, we didn't see that written about a lot. It was kind of implied, but it wasn't really discussed. So I felt like we needed to really think about this. And in writing the 2006 book, I spent a lot of time reading about the evolutionary history of work, reading about the anthropology of work, sociology of work, and I loved all of that. And I mean, if you think about work as something that we did, our prehistoric ancestors, it was integral to their survival. So it's not like they got up and said, I'm going to become a carpenter today. It was like, okay, what do we have to do today to survive till tomorrow? And that was basically life. So those tasks of survival became the antecedents of what we now know as work. So as societies became more complex and multi-layered, work became much more varied. And that work became particularly varied around the time that human beings moved toward agriculture and animal husbandry, raising livestock and raising crops, which happened, according to most scientists, like 12,000, 15,000 years ago. Some cases a little bit later. So as people move from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to more agricultural lifestyles where they stayed in the same place, people began this concept of land ownership, and that's when the hierarchy of power, economic power, and what I call the maldistribution of roles according to gender started to get entrenched. So with land ownership came about the acquisition of economic and social power. Another cluster of needs are the needs for social connection and contribution. So work facilitates social connections and also provides a means for us to make social contributions, to contribute to the overall social good. People, as we know, study in various theories in developmental psychology, psychodynamic psychology, and relational theories, that people are hardwired to be in connection. We were talking at lunch today about the crisis of belonging that I think a lot of our societies are seeing now, especially with older people, where they're becoming more and more isolated. And we know that we're hardwired to be in connection. And work provides one of those means for those connections, not the only one, but certainly an important one. So social contribution has to do with this idea of doing things that are meaningful and purposeful. That would be the best way to describe it, using language that's used a lot today in counseling and vocational psychology. Work provides people with a connection to the broader social world. In my 2019 book, I did tell this story about how my mother, I think this is a story that I do reveal something, that I was not a perfect child, even though I remember that I was really a good kid. But at one point she said to me, I must have said something that was not very nice about their jobs or whatever, and she said, "David, what your father and I do has dignity. Don't ever critique what we do. I work in a department store." She worked in not in a fancy department store. She said, "I help people who can't afford a lot of good makeup." She worked in cosmetics. "I can help them find great products that don't cost a lot of money." And she was well known, like this, you have to see Jeanette Blustein. And my father was a sheet metal mechanic and loved to look at planes and say, "I helped to contribute to these planes being able to fly." So that was very important for them, and that somehow taught me a very powerful lesson, that work has the capacity, even if it's not something that people volitionally choose out of interest, for people to actually contribute to the broader social world, to keep the cogs of society going. I also believe that working, as I mentioned earlier, can take place in the marketplace as well as through personal care. And my colleague, Mary Sue Richardson, has written a lot about this more recently in her career. And she has described how there's two types of personal care work, paid and unpaid. And she's written really brilliantly about the gendered nature of those types of care work. So the third cluster of needs revolves around the need for self-determination. And this is the part of the psychology of working theory that connects to motivation. What motivates people to work? And I remember when I first met Paula and Eduardo in 1992, and we were sitting like in the lobby there one evening, talking about motivation theory, and they had read an article that I wrote in 1988 on motivational orientations, which didn't really represent for me like the core of what I was interested in. It was kind of like, these constructs look like they're related to career decision-making and career exploration. Let's see how they work. So reading this work of self-determination theory of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, reading it in the late 80s, it was profoundly influential. One main reason was that they described how we can take extrinsically motivating activities and make them part of who we are, make them part of our own self-determined, autonomous life. And I thought this was a great set of ideas that actually at that point already was applied to work, and that we should bring it into psychology of working theory. So the ideas were that there are three basic conditions, that if these conditions are fulfilled, people will be more likely to internalize and self-regulate. I see some of you nodding, a lot of you probably know this theory. So these are the three aspects. If we have a sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, we're more likely to be able to find extrinsically motivating activities meaningful. So now we're going to have this musical interlude. So let me set this up. Okay, so in my classes, I usually play music. More recently, I've been getting critique that the music I play is too old. And I ask the students to bring in suggestions. I look for music that has to do at work, that not just has to do at work, but can emotionally move us, that can teach us something different than what we would learn from reading, research, or theories. Something that's going to experientially, have an impact on us. So the song I usually start off my master's classes in career development with is Bruce Springsteen's The River. How many of you know this song? So a lot of you know it. So, okay, so I'll set it up for you. So Bruce Springsteen introduced this song for the first time at a benefit concert. This is maybe more information than you wanted, but it's actually really interesting. At a benefit concert in 1979, it's interesting to think about this now with our conceptualization of energy. The idea then was to eradicate all nuclear power plants, the no nukes movement. I don't know if you remember that. So that was the big push then, was to get rid of these nuclear power plants because there was concern about radiation. Now, of course, they're an alternative to fossil fuels. It's like they've gotten safer. Fossil fuels, we're clear that they're destroying the planet, so things have changed. But this song actually, when he introduced it the first time, he said, this is a song about my sister and my brother-in-law. So this was somewhat autobiographical about actually what happened to his oldest sister in a marriage that happened rather quickly after she got pregnant. So I'm going to play the song now, and I hope that hope they will come out of the speakers. Let's see how this goes. Okay, now I'm going to have to read Portuguese. So to copy it, which one? Oh, let me just try it with this. Okay. Copy. Did that work? Let's find out. Paste it? Is this paste? Which is paste? Which one?
Yes.
I didn't take it.
Yes, sir.
Wait, Joachim, you could do it. Go ahead.
Well, but I need my glasses.
Okay, so you see,
Well, I think I can do it.
I don't think we picked up the copy.
Esse é copiar. Não, é baixo, é baixo. Esse.
You didn't. Yeah, I know that if I go with Control C.
No, it's not taking the whole,
No, now it did. Oops, sorry, I'm taking. Why?
you know what, I'll look it up here. Let's just, oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Let's see if we can, the volume.
Da XTB.
Oh, let's try this.
Qual é o seu plano de investimento? Lembra
First off, I need some help in moving it to the slides. Sorry about that. So I play this song in the class for a number of reasons. Oh, thank you. They did it from there. Perfecto. Okay. I play this song because I think it captures the intersection of work and relationships in a very deep way. And I think the song has so many levels of depth about memory, haunting memories, having a love and losing a love, the effect of not having opportunities on a person's life. But I feel like, actually, for the most part, the students like this song. I did play a song last week, and I asked the students if they liked it. It was actually another Bruce Springsteen song, but a very dark one from the album Nebraska. And the student said, I don't like that song at all. You shouldn't play it in class. It's too dark. I said, okay, I won't play it in class. Okay, so we're going to use this as a transition point to take us to moving from a framework to a theory. And here now the Coimbra connection thread becomes more alive. So, at the beginning was the Psychology of Working framework, the book. People call it the framework or the perspective. During my time in the early 2000s at Boston College, I had a number of students working with me. One of them was Ryan Duffy, the person who was closest, he's on your left, and then next to him is Matt Deemer, and then next to Matt Deemer is Kelsey Autan. Kelsey did not work with me, she was one of Ryan's students. So Ryan was an undergraduate at the time, and as I think I told people at a dinner last night, he literally is an 18-year-old undergraduate, and this is in a university where you don't study, you join a faculty, it's a general university. He knocked on my door and he said, David, I want to be a vocational psychologist. I know your work, I want to work with you. And I said, you're the first person at that point, it was like 15 years, I said, who's ever come in with that kind of enthusiasm. I said, have a seat, you're a member of the team immediately. No interview was required. And he worked with me for 4 years and was a part of the Psychology of Working conversations, but primarily Ryan was interested then in spirituality and career, and he actually did a first authored Journal of Vocational Behavior article as an undergraduate then. Matt Deemer, the person in the middle, started with me in 1999 and came into Boston College with an interest in critical consciousness, was very knowledgeable about Paulo Freire's work. So just to go back, Ryan Duffy is now a professor at University of Florida. Matt Deemer is now a professor at the University of Michigan. And Matt Deemer is one of the world's leading experts on critical consciousness. Ryan Duffy basically would help to take Psychology of Working from a framework to a theory. Kelsey Autan was a student at Florida and is now associate professor at University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. So how did this begin? What is the Coimbra connection? The Coimbra connection has to do with, I believe it was the SVP conference of 2014. And in order to understand this, you have to go to the next slide and see the pool at the Dona Inês Hotel. So this is literally the spot where we dreamed up this idea of moving from a framework to a theory. So Ryan was at this conference. Ryan actually had come to Portugal in 2003 as an undergrad. We had some funds and he came here with a group of other Boston College students. So he came, that was the first SVP conference he came to. So in this case, he texted me, and I had just arrived that morning, and he texted me, he goes, David, can I come to your hotel? I want to talk to you about an idea. And I said, sure, come on over. I'm sitting by the pool, and he came there. And he said, David, would you be interested in moving Psychology of Working from a framework to a theory? He had asked me a few times before, and I said no. And at this particular time, I said yes. Not quite sure why I changed my mind, but I did. And we sat down there for about a few hours and sketched out the ideas like on a napkin. And Matt Deemer was also in Coimbra, and he didn't come over, but he said, I'm interested. And we met a few times during this conference. And from 2014 to 2016, we developed this theory, and wrote up the manuscript and published it in Journal of Counseling Psychology. He asked me, he said, David, I assume you're going to be the first author? I said, no, Ryan, you're going to be the first author on this. It's important for your career. I'm a full professor already, and what I didn't tell him was I knew from reading some previous theoretical critiques that the theories that last beyond the time of the professor's life or active role are the theories where there's somebody who's going to pick it up, somebody who's going to work on it. And I knew Ryan was interested in it, and also happened to be the first author was a way of ensuring that he was invested in it. So it was a way for me to kind of create this legacy and this forward motion for this theory. So the idea was to develop an interdisciplinary theory. Ryan's main goal was to generate more research on psychology of working. He knew that the way to do this was to make a theory that was relatively parsimonious and that we could develop measures that were short and that could be used inexpensively and quickly. So we also, one of the things that I did do, aside from bringing in the psychology of working ideas, was to bring in the concept of decent work, which I had actually learned about a few years before. Decent work is not a Ryan Duffy or David Blustein idea. It's an idea from the International Labor Organization. And it's an idea that came to life in 1999. And actually, I've kind of done a lot of reading about the history of it. It was developed by the ILO as a way to help, actually, interestingly, Western countries that were losing high-paid manufacturing jobs to globalization. And the Western labor unions in these countries and governments were concerned about that the quality of work was deteriorating. I think it was also the reality was the quality of work never really moved beyond a deteriorating state in many developing countries. So the experience of decent work from an individual perspective includes these 5 attributes. The figure on the right-hand side of this slide is from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, where they have put decent work in as one of their goals. You'll see, though, it's paired with economic growth. It's a very interesting pairing. In some ways, I feel like each of these were paired together to neutralize the political impact of the other. So the people in favor of economic growth might be considered neoliberals in some ways, and I think by putting decent work in, it was like a way of attenuating the impact of this kind of late-stage capitalism. And for those of us interested in decent work, I felt like we should have had our own sustainable development goal, because it's not necessarily correlated with economic growth. In some ways, you could even see economic growth as antithetical to decent work. If you always have to grow the economy, you're not as concerned about creating decent jobs. So this is the model that we developed. And Ryan Duffy studied for his PhD with Bob Lent at University of Maryland to develop social cognitive career theory. And if you look at the social cognitive career theory model of 1994, the same exact kinds of principles we use. Not that the constructs aren't the same, but the idea of dotted lines representing theoretical connections, solid lines representing connections that had empirical support. And we basically put together the ideas from the 2006 book and put them into this kind of ready-made model with work volition and career adaptability functioning as mediators of economic constraints and marginalization. Oh, I'm looking at and then decent work mediating the impact on the accessibility of people's capacities to meet their needs, and then these 2 outcomes being work fulfillment and well-being. So in terms of a cultural critique, I think we need to think about this concept of autonomy, for example, from self-determination theory. Is that a concept that is relevant across all cultures? I think the answer we know is no. How do different cultures understand career choice privilege? And how are well-being and meaning understood across different cultures? And there's many other cultural questions as well. One of the positive things now is there's a lot of research on PWT taking place around the world. and it's been really quite exciting, including some great studies from here in Portugal. In 2019, Maureen Kenny, one of my close friends and colleagues from Boston College, Kelsey Autain, and Ryan Duffy, we wrote an applied practice-oriented paper for the Career Development Quarterly on applying psychology of working to practice, and we also conceptualized the psychology of working as a theory of change. That the theory, in our view, was developed not just to describe things, but to foster the kind of research and public policy interventions that will help to enact positive social and economic change and political change. So this model is fairly basic and fundamental. We developed it this way so it could be used with different theoretical orientations, both in the world of psychotherapy, career counseling, also in the world of policy reforms and institutional changes. There are two phases to this theory of change paradigm. One is a needs assessment, and the second is creating change through agentic action. And then there's also two domains upon which we can enact change. One is individual, and the other is structural or systemic. So in terms of the needs assessment piece, we conceptualized these three PWT needs, and we provided examples here of systemic implications as well as individual implications. These tables and all of this material is provided in that Career Development Quarterly article. Then we also outlined three sources of agentic change. And these, again, come from the literature on career counseling and psychotherapy, as well as the change-oriented literature, structural change-oriented literature. The first one is proactive engagement. And the idea there is to help clients or help systems actively engage in their lives to take action. It could be individuals taking action, to do career exploration. It could be systems taking action to try to reduce inequities or to introduce diversity, equity, and inclusion interventions. Another cluster of sources of agentic change are social and community support. And here we're thinking about the ways in which both relationships, interpersonal relationships, as well as community-based supports can provide people with the impetus to make change, as well as the kind of secure base to manage the stress and the lack of connection of changes. And the third set of change processes comes out of the world of critical consciousness. I found this painting online. It's amazing. It's a painting of Paulo Freire, who wrote this amazing book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it shows here the working people of Brazil over his shoulder, a woman coming in with a book, because he was tasked by the Brazilian government in the 1960s to help improve literacy in Brazil, and he responded by saying, I will teach people to read, but also to read the world. And reading the world is a great way to describe what critical consciousness is. And then you could see this more ideal vision, at the other end of the painting. So using the PWT model, we can use it to inform both individual and group interventions, as well as systemic changes. I will give an example of a recent group type of intervention that Joaquin Ferreira is a member of this group. It's called the Work Intervention Network. We developed it at the height of the first few months of the pandemic, when I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was thinking, what can we do with our body of knowledge to make this world better? Feels like everything's falling apart. We had huge unemployment. I'm sure you had the same thing here in the first few months. And I wrote emails to people around the world who I knew were thinking about these issues, and I had research that was relevant. And we put together a global team of 10 people, and we developed, here you have, by the way, I'm just showing you, there's a link to our website. We are lucky enough to have Boston College support us in having a website. We developed the Work Intervention Network, where we set up 4 modules, 4 thematic modules that actually encompass 6 workshops. And these are relatively structured interventions. It's not quite a manualized intervention, but relatively structured. And you could see the 4 basic themes here. One is planning, exploring, and engaging in the job search. The second one is deepening and sustaining relationships. This is not a traditional approach on networking for jobs. It's on helping people who are unemployed, who often struggle with intense levels of isolation, helping them to develop connections. The third area is fostering social awareness and reducing self-blame, which builds on the critical consciousness work, also builds on work of one of the members of our team, Ofer Sharon, who has written like groundbreaking work on the need for unemployed people to be able to think critically about the causes of their situation. Then the fourth one is a mental health prevention set of workshops on building emotional resilience and self-care. We don't run these workshops ourselves. Actually, one of the colleagues, Amy Mazer, does run the workshops. Our role we see as the research and development arm of this. We do research on it. We train people. We train people at no cost. But we are training now people who are working in the nonprofit sector, or maybe individual practitioners. We got some queries recently from somebody who's a high-level HR consultant who wanted to put our materials on their website, and we didn't say yes to that. So, in terms of new directions for psychology and working theory, this is, again, trying to give you something to look forward to in this talk, something new. PWT is a flexible framework. In terms of the model use that I showed you a few slides ago, we are aware that the career adaptability construct is not working as well. And I know there's various people in the PWT community, Ryan and his former students, and other people around the world who are thinking of different ways of assessing career adaptability. My interpretation of that not working is that the PWT variables are really kind of sociological in a sense, and career adaptability is a very career, individual, psychological variable. I think it's a case of like apples and oranges. So we view PWT as a fertile soil that can really help to create some new ideas. So some of the ideas that I'm working on, one of them is workplace dignity. I have just submitted a paper with Blake Allen, who was one of Ryan Duffy's former students, who's a very close colleague and friend, and we just wrote a theoretical paper on dignity at work. And we're excited to kind of infuse this conversation about dignity into psychology of working, and also into career development and counseling psychology. We're also interested in the idea of precarity. I've been reading a lot about precarity over the last few years, literature from outside of our field, reading people like Judith Butler, a number of other people, Michelle Fine. There's a number of really brilliant radical psychologists and social scientists who've been writing about this being the age of precarity. And I think you could see this in looking at even at this decade, the 2020s, that it starts with a pandemic. We have multiple wars. We have questions about the future of democracy. And it does feel like in some ways that the ground doesn't feel as stable. So I have a paper with some colleagues that's under review here as well. And this is a concept that's actually a concept that I think, that I understand it historically as coming from European social and political movements. The United States and North Americans were not that much talking about or writing about precarity, but in Europe it has been something that's been a front burner issue among a lot of political and labor movements. So at this point, I wanted to make sure I ended in time for there to be some questions, and then we'll have time to honor our colleague and friend Eduardo Santos. So thank you very much. So if it's okay, I'll sit down now.
Well, thank you, David, for your excellent talk and provoking us. Thank you for bringing also the song. You know, I did ask you, well, and I told my students, some of them are here, that, well, David Blustein integrates music in his work, and you do, and really well, and I think that, well, thank you. Well, it is, you knew, all of you, the ones that know me, that I have had a long relationship with David Blustein, with Professor David Blustein. It has been an honor and a privilege, David. I'm not going to, I'm going to give really to the persons that here, but I want to ask some questions, but really I'm not going to say all the awards that you had, because really I know that, as I mentioned, a person that gets the highest award in our area at the EPA, it says it all. So well, of course that, you know, I have also to say that, you know, I have learned a lot with you all over the years. You have been an influence of many of us in our college, particularly in the career psychology domain. And it was a privilege to work with you and Eduardo, that is not here, that we will honor him later, and then being able to, during the pandemic, working in developing the WIN and being part of the WIN group, that, you know, I was invited, and it was a privilege really to be part with such a great group of people and scholars, and led by you, let's put it this way, that you were the leader since many years ago, so that, you know, PWT, it is, of course, it is Brian, that we like Brian Duffy a lot, and he's a great scholar, but, you know, the backbone of the theory and all of that, it is really your ideas that have been developed and matured for many years. So thank you very much for the contribution, and being a friend of the University of Coimbra, the Faculty of Psychology, that you know them all, like Paula and Zé Tomás, and you have been here, and so you are a friend of the university, and we consider you as also our colleague, like a faculty member at this university, okay? So now, David, you... I'm going to give the floor. So, eu vou dirigir-me às pessoas, so that, you know, to have, you know, 10 minutes of dialogue, you know, expecting. It is not a moment of silence, just, you know, asking questions. You know, you did propose here, you know, the further where we are going through. Of course, that, you know, I might, if they don't ask you a question, you know, I'd like you to further explain how do you see our field moving in this interconnection between work and mental health, and even in terms of the theory that it is present. You know, we have it well-being, but mental well-being and also mental health. Many studies have already related that, they already have been published. But I'm going to give the floor, so that anyone that will want to ask a question, please feel free to do it. E agora, as pessoas que queiram fazer em português, as questões em português, fazem em português, que eu posso traduzir. I can translate if you want, or if you want to, ou se quiserem colocar em inglês, please. And I am going to take the microphone, so that you don't need to come here, you can just... Okay? Quem é primeiro? Carlos está ali. Well, I want also to acknowledge several people that are here. Carlos, Professor Carlos Gonçalves from the University of Porto, a dear friend, and also a very special person. All Isabel Quirino, that I also want to acknowledge. Lydia Santos, Ida, that she's working also with me in psychology of working theory. Also, adding some of these ideas, Jorge Pereira, not well, and the colleagues in our college, the students, and so on. So now, who has questions? And also, let's put it this way, my wife that is sitting here. It wasn't because, I didn't want it to. Now it is. No? Yes, okay. Who?
Olá, eu vou falar em português porque eu acho que vai facilitar. No último slide falou que essa perspectiva trabalha também focando a justiça social e equidade, mas eu fiquei interessada em saber mais sobre como trabalha isso. E também, pensando em tempos de incerteza e da precarização do trabalho, precariedade nas condições de trabalho, fico pensando também em como que se pensa uma perspectiva de carreira, considerando que os direitos trabalhistas estão cada vez menores, assim, a gente tem visto uma degradação dos direitos trabalhistas e as condições de trabalho têm oferecido perspectivas de futuro e até mesmo de certeza quanto à remuneração, que acabam por trazer uma sensação justamente de culpa e também de medo muito grande. Então, eu fiquei pensando como que se trabalha a questão da redução da autopobilização e também do medo nesse contexto que traz muita incerteza.
David, I can. Well, but I'm going to go to the last part, okay? Because it is very complex. But, you addressed many different issues and so on. But the last part is about change. How can, in a world that we are living with less and less rights for the working people, how can we reduce the blame and how can we, in the intervention, also in the systemic intervention, how can you also change this? How can we move? One is individually, how can you reduce the self-blaming and this also disparities, this feeling of fear and anxiety? It is in the individual. And also, how can we contribute to reducing the inequalities in the world and being social justice that you also address in your talk? I know that there were many other, but then you can follow up because some might, But well, David, it is lots of please.
You've raised so many questions, complicated questions. Can you all hear through this? Okay, so, I'll just give a few little snippets of responses. I think that improving the protections for workers, I think all of these changes will take place primarily at a macro and meso level, through political action, through educating people on the importance of democracy, and here I will give some credit to my colleague and friend Ingrid Bakke, who's from Norway, who's here today, who's written about democratic career counseling. I think we've talked about how democracy is in a place of precarity right now, and a despairing part of me would say that yes, we're in a lot of trouble, but I go back 3 or 4 years ago when, in this same time of year, my wife Lisa, who's back here, and I were in Norway, and they were asking us who was going to win the Democratic primary, and we all said Bernie Sanders at that point. That was before Super Tuesday. Joe Biden won. I'm not sure about that. I'm not trying to say how I feel about him now. I think that's complicated, but I certainly support him over the competition by far. But Joe Biden, as the President of the United States, did more to restore worker protections than any president, even more than Lyndon Johnson, even more than Franklin Roosevelt. It's not well discussed, but he's done more to support labor unions. So macro level, policy changes do often come from the top, but there has to be a groundswell of support and advocacy and insistence that we have greater equality. I think that we're in a period of a lot of questioning about the free market neoliberal movement. I think we have to really be very clear that this kind of neoliberalism has done a lot to hurt people, especially people who are vulnerable. So I think there's large-scale political changes, but we're also facing, and that many of us experiences, fears that the right wing is growing also. So it's a very difficult period. I can't predict how it's going to come out. I know how I'd like it to come out. And then, I think I should respond to some other questions.
The other one, that I'd like, it has some, in terms of, it is a time of also fear, getting a job, for example, for students moving from college to work or losing a job, and then reducing self-blame. That it is one of the models of the WIN intervention. Do you want to talk a little bit about it, please?
Reducing self-blame, and I've been working in this space as a practitioner for years. Some of the most significant empathic failures that I've had with clients have been when I have come in like very strong on reducing self-blame, on critical consciousness. I remember I worked with a client who was African American, and he was highly educated and was getting laid off a lot. And from what I could discern, there was nothing in his performance that would lead to it. And I brought up the issue of racism, and he got enraged at me. And it was a really powerful experience. And one of the reasons why he got angry was, he said, "You're taking away my agency. I can make changes." And so I think what I learned from that is it has to be done with a lot of care and empathy, and really, as some of the scholars in critical consciousness talk about, is using Socratic questioning, using music, helping people to explore these ideas, like on films. There's a great documentary on Netflix that Michelle and Barack Obama produced called Working, based on Studs Terkel's book. It's kind of also, everybody in the PWT community thinks it's based on our work, but we're being grandiose. But this Obama's video is amazing, and having clients watch that and coming in to talk about it, things like that I think could help people to foster social awareness without, making the counseling session into a political debate. It has to be done with subtlety, but with clarity as well.
Thank you very much for your brilliant talk. I think that you already addressed what I'm going to ask, but for you, can we talk about one biggest challenge to self-determination theory nowadays in the context where we live? I don't know if we can think about universal context, but I would appreciate to hear your opinion about the theory, the challenge of the theory.
Okay,
thank you very much.
And thank you for turning my microphone on. My mistake. Okay, so I think the biggest challenge is in the area of autonomy. I think that I think there's a kind of assumption that the self-determination theorists have made that people can just kind of have autonomy, but in many people's work lives, they don't have autonomy. If they're struggling to meet survival needs, they're not going to have as much autonomy. So I think that area is an area of question, big question, and it's a big assumption that people will have access to autonomy. I think there's somebody up here. Oh, there's here as well.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your intervention. So I'm interested, I'm writing my master thesis on boundaries between work and personal life, and I was wondering if psychology of work in theory has sort of addressed these boundaries that in the recent literature there's been research have been saying, that they're increasingly blurred because of the technology and because of women have more access to work and etc. So I was just wondering if psychology of work, from your standpoint, what would say about these blurred boundaries?
Yeah, I wrote about it a lot in the 2006 book. It was one of the big sources of motivation for me to develop this model and this theory. I felt that work and relationships, work and mental health are inextricably connected, and that I think the tradition in both, let me think of it from the perspective of individual interventions, that the world of psychotherapy is overly circumscribed, its work to, family issues, or now, of course, symptoms, with the CBT, DBT models of reducing symptoms. But I think that psychology of working has had a lot to say about it, and there's been a fair amount of research on it, particularly in the qualitative domain, where we could see the nature of these relationships and these work issues intertwining in very complex ways, like the vignette that I started out with. That's a great example of it. And the song "The River."
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation, and it was wonderful to hear about your personal background.
Thank you.
Thank you. But my question is not related to that. My question is, how do you see within the PWT the challenge that artificial intelligence brings to the world of work?
That's a great question. I think I haven't discussed this with my PWT colleagues. I talk about it with students. I think artificial intelligence has a tremendous potential impact to endanger the work lives of people who are not at the higher skill levels, the people whose jobs can be replaced quickly by artificial intelligence. And I think also even people who are like attorneys, even in positions like academia, there are some concerns that jobs can be replaced by artificial intelligence. I think as we speculate about the future, both short-term and longer-term, I think society has to come up with ways to, first of all, ensure that people can survive, and even beyond that, that people have opportunities to engage in projects if, let's say, there is no work for people, but they're able to make a living through social services, that people have to have access to find things in their lives that are meaningful. That said, I personally am not that impressed with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. I use it rarely. Almost every time I ask it to do something, it can't do it. So my experience is we don't have a threat, but I'm sure I know like 1% of it. So I mean, my experience is very personal. Yes, Nathan?
Thank you. So my question is related to also the idea about autonomy and because I think that the conceptualization of autonomy until now may have been detrimental in kind of contributing to an individualized perspective and to blaming the victim. So that is, so I agree with what you were saying, but my question is related to, because I think that's one of the most difficult dimensions when we are thinking, for example, of how precarity, uncertainty, unemployment erode agency. So my question is related to the concept of agency, because I've been thinking about it a lot, because on the one hand, of course, we want to promote the development of agency and make people feel like they have some control over their lives. But at the same time, the problem is that the social, economic, and political context removes that possibility of control. So so people who are in extremely vulnerable situations do not have the power to have agency in their lives. So I have been going into agency through this perspective and the relationship with power, but I was wondering how you would think about this, and how would you provide a kind of a strategy to reconcile these tensions in the concept. So that's it.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
think that's a great point, because I know when I recommended to my colleagues in that 2019 article that we use agency, I did it with some level of some ambivalence, because I realized that once you start speaking about agency, it kind of overshadows the context. So, and I see this also when I teach now, and I start to talk about individual issues, students say, well, what about the context? And I think that they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that helping people to become agentic with a critical consciousness can be very useful. In fact, the research that people like Matt Diemer have done is to demonstrate that developing a critical consciousness actually helps people to become more agentic. And we see this a lot. We see this in urban schools in the United States. Doing critical consciousness training helps to improve grades, helps to improve investment and engagement. So there's a connection between them that is really, really powerful. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think that, too much agency is going to, maybe lead to too many Donald Trumps. But too little agency, people will feel overwhelmed and have to push back. And part of the pushback politically is to have agency.
One last question. Okay. Vocês vão?
Sorry, I'm not a psychologist, but I have this question. In the network you have in your faculty, university, do you have a special treat for migrant people or not?
For the Work Intervention Network?
Yes.
Yeah, no, we don't have it yet, but you've given us a good idea.
Because I'm very concerned about that, even in Portugal or in this city. So I was thinking about working with those people.
Yeah,
specific.
we are looking at this point in the WIN project to adapt the project to more specialized populations. So yes, we're very, very interested in these new ideas. And Joachim, at our next meeting, remind me to bring it up. It's a good idea. Yes.
Thank you very much.
I will come down.
Well, we are going to, you worked on that session, you are the team.
No.
Well,
David closes the session.
okay, well.
I'll
thank you
close.
very
Well,
much,
okay.
David, and thank you also for being present and the questions that you made. I know that many other questions that you might have, but we have now another session starting at 5:30, and it is the time, we are on time. So thank you, David.
Thank you.
à sessão que vamos agora iniciar, de homenagem, breve homenagem ao nosso colega Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos. Faz agora cerca de um ano que faleceu, e pensámos que não havia melhor maneira de o homenagear e de pensar um pouco sobre ele e sobre a sua carreira e sobre o significado do seu percurso, do que quando o professor David Blustein viesse à Universidade de Coimbra, à Faculdade de Psicologia, uma vez que o professor David Blustein teve um impacto enorme na sua carreira, na atribuição de sentido que ele fez a muitas atividades do ponto de vista profissional, das suas publicações, enfim, e de outras atividades que ele teve na Universidade de Coimbra. E, ao mesmo tempo, sabíamos que o professor David Blustein gostaria imenso de participar nessa homenagem, uma vez que para ele também o professor e o colega Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos, o amigo, fez parte muito integrante da sua vida profissional e da sua vida pessoal, posso assim dizer, uma vez que, como ainda agora vimos, o trabalho e as relações estão intimamente relacionados nas nossas vidas a todos os níveis. So, David, I was saying that it is now more or less a year, 1 year and a month, that our colleague Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos passed away, as you know it. And we chose this moment to have this, this ceremony, let's say, this moment, because both you and Eduardo were very close, and he really should be glad, he should be honored, and I think it would be very significant for him that you would be present in this moment in time. And for you, the same, and you will talk about it because you were so close over more than 30 years. So we chose this moment in time to pay him, to think about him collectively as a faculty and as friends that were together in his life. So, neste momento, nesta mesa, nós temos, para além do professor David Blustein e do professor Joaquim Armando Ferreira, que foi o organizador desta sessão e que vai já falar um pouco mais sobre o colega Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos, com quem ele esteve tão próximo de todos os pontos de vista, mas também os nossos colegas, que eu agradeço muito estarem aqui presentes e estão aqui presentes nesta mesa, porque representam as ligações que a Faculdade de Psicologia teve, através do Eduardo, com a Universidade de Lisboa. Temos aqui a colega Maria João Alvarez, que é co-coordenadora do Programa Interuniversitário em Psicologia da Educação, de que o professor Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos, o colega Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos, era co-coordenador na Universidade de Coimbra, uma vez que, como todos sabem, é um programa interuniversitário que une as universidades de Lisboa e de Coimbra, e o professor Carlos Gonçalves, da Faculdade de Psicologia e Ciências da Educação da Universidade do Porto, com quem o Eduardo teve uma longa experiência de colaboração, também com o já falecido, a quem presto as minhas homenagens públicas, já as prestei de outras formas, o colega Joaquim Coimbra, e, portanto, o colega Carlos Gonçalves e o colega Joaquim Coimbra colaboraram de diferentes formas com o professor Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos ao longo da vida, não é? E, portanto, representam duas faculdades também, além das relações pessoais e profissionais muito próximas, representam duas faculdades com quem a Faculdade de Psicologia e Ciências da Educação está intimamente ligada, e está intimamente ligada a um aspecto da vida do Eduardo Ribeiro dos Santos que eu gostaria aqui de realçar. Foram as três faculdades que estiveram, e o Eduardo esteve nesse momento, estiveram ligadas à introdução, à entrada dos psicólogos na escola em 1983, e foram precisamente as três faculdades que, conjuntamente, de forma articulada, trabalharam não apenas na supervisão científica dos psicólogos, mas até na supervisão administrativa, porque inicialmente estas faculdades faziam, digamos, a administração de todos os aspectos da entrada dos psicólogos na escola, mesmo os financeiros. E, portanto, estão aqui representadas as 3 faculdades que estão intimamente relacionadas com aquilo que certamente seria, para o Eduardo, tenho a certeza, um momento altamente significativo na sua vida pessoal, que foi, precisamente, a entrada dos psicólogos na escola e que correspondeu à entrada dele na vida académica, enfim, não é a entrada propriamente, mas um dos primeiros momentos significativos. E, portanto, por todos esses motivos, os colegas Maria João Alvarez e Carlos Gonçalves estão aqui a mesa está composta por estas mesmas razões que são, creio, significativas para todos. E sem mais, eu passo a palavra ao professor Joaquim Armando Ferreira para vos falar um pouco como é que foi pensada este momento. E agradeço a todos a vossa presença aqui, pois ela é significativa para nós.
Pronto, obrigado, professora Paula Paixão, que é aqui na qualidade de diretora da faculdade. Dizer que não foi fácil, assim, e as pessoas que foram chamadas podiam ter sido outras, e vamos ter aqui 2 partes, uma parte em que cada um de nós vai falar um pouco sobre o Eduardo. Vou pedir também à professora Isabel Festas para proferir umas palavras, e à Elisa, e à doutora Elisa também. Depois seguir-se-á um vídeo que organizamos em que recolhi e pedi a algumas das pessoas próximas do Eduardo, alguns ex-alunos, ex-doutorandos, mas e sobretudo colegas de diferentes universidades que partilharam connosco muito trabalho de investigação e de colaboração e de discussão de ideias de várias universidades que vocês vão ver. Alguns deles estiveram já cá, todos eles estiveram na nossa universidade, todos esses colegas. Agradeço a colaboração, mandaram-nos uns vídeos e agradeço aqui também ao Diogo e ao Miguel o trabalho que fizeram depois de organizar toda essa informação, quer as fotos que estão neste momento, que eventualmente vão ser passadas aqui lembrando, nem é uma homenagem, nem sabemos muito bem como é que havíamos de chamar a esta sessão, mas essencialmente é recordar um colega e amigo de muitos anos, uma pessoa brilhante que passou por nós, que deu um contributo para a área muito significativo, como foi desde o início. Nós também tínhamos cá uma psicóloga da primeira geração, que era a doutora Isabel Moraes, mas que infelizmente está doente e que não vai estar cá presente. Mas gostava aqui de dizer também 2 ou 3 palavras. Assim, esta teoria foi criada aqui em Coimbra, foi iniciada a partir das ideias do professor David Blustein, mas teve muito a ver com a organização da conferência anual da Sociedade, da Society for Vocational Psychology, que é a secção da Divisão 17 da Associação Americana de Psicologia, que pela primeira vez se deslocou dos Estados Unidos para vir para um país europeu. See, what I'm saying is that it was the first time that the Society for Vocational Psychology came to outside of the US, it came to Coimbra. The first time. And it had e teve muito a ver com o empenho. And it had a lot to do with our involvement, Eduardo and I, yes, and the other people in the Society for Vocational Psychology, because they trusted us, and of course that we had the support. I remember with you and how we were kind of sketching up the proposal, yes, because it had to be a proposal that had to be approved by the board, and we had it twice in yes, Coimbra. And it had a lot to do also with the work of Eduardo. So I want, I'm not going to say, não vou aqui falar das inúmeras organizações através do IPC e que o Eduardo coordenou durante muitos anos, mas de 5 encontros muito significativos que muito prestigiaram a nossa universidade. As 2 conferências da SVP, porque eram muito importantes, porque nós debatíamos there was debate, should it go here or should it go there, with the proposal that SVP, the first conferences, I know how that, and we had your support and Nadia's support, also another great colleague and an excellent scholar, a professora Nádia Fuado também, que nos apoiou muito, a Dona Schulteis, entre outras pessoas. Mas essas 2 conferências e também os encontros, que foram muito apoiados tanto pela faculdade e pelo IPCE, que foram os encontros com a Universidade, com a State University of New York at Albany, que tivemos cá 3 excelentes encontros na nossa faculdade e que eu espero que este diálogo e trazer pessoas, quer professores, quer alunos de mestrado e de doutoramento, que tenha continuidade com a Albany ou com outras instituições, como nós, por vezes, temos vindo também a discutir, mesmo aqui com a professora Paula Paixão. Mas eu gostava de destacar isso. Mas é óbvio que não é pelo lado académico, aquilo que eu me lembro e as saudades do Eduardo, também tinha muito a ver com o envolvimento muito pessoal, a relação que mantivemos, quer nas idas a encontros científicos, quer nas tertúlias que nós tínhamos, muitas vezes no final do dia, ali no Café Oasis, em que algumas das ideias iam sendo redigidas em cima de guardanapos de papel ou de toalhas de papel. Eu gostava aqui de destacar que, na verdade, estamos perante uma mente brilhante, que às vezes, assim, e a professora Paula já destacou, era uma pessoa também, da mesma forma como eu considero o professor David Blustein, que sai da área muitas vezes, lendo fora, o Eduardo era uma pessoa que trazia ideias de fora da área, mesmo da psicologia, da sociologia, da antropologia, mesmo esta compreensão profunda das questões e que, na verdade, avançava com ideias novas e, em algumas, muitas vezes não era, tal como o professor David Blustein, muitas vezes até um bocadinho afastados do teste de modelos que as coisas têm que estar relacionadas, não. Era mais ao nível da conceptualização. Acho que era uma pessoa excelente e que, infelizmente, o perdemos demasiado cedo porque ainda tinha muito para dar à instituição e ao pensamento sobre a psicologia vocacional nesta forma muito mais abrangente, de olhar um bocadinho o ser humano, e o trabalho é uma das centralidades na pessoa humana. Mas era uma pessoa extremamente leal, quer dizer, assim, que por vezes as pessoas não têm, era bondosa, partilhava tudo. Qualquer pessoa que lhe pedisse um PowerPoint, seja lá o que fosse, era a pessoa que era tudo, e eu via, para mim fazia-me isso, eu dizia, Eduardo, interessante, era logo, disponibilizava tudo, portanto gostava de destacar a bondade, a partilha, sem limites. Era uma pessoa complexa, eu pessoalmente sinto a falta dele, e tal como é o título desta sessão, acho que nós, e que será sempre recordado por mim e pela faculdade, e por muitas pessoas desta faculdade. Portanto, também ao Eduardo, uma salva de palmas, é aquilo que eu peço. Passava a palavra a David.
Thank you. This one, yeah. Thank you all for inviting my wife Lisa and I to Coimbra during this period where we honor Eduardo Santos. I prepared a few written remarks. I wanted to think these out, so if you don't mind, I'll read it. I'm deeply honored to be able to participate in this program to honor Professor Eduardo Santos, who I had known as a dear colleague and friend for over 30 years. I would like to share some memories that I have of being with Eduardo, which I think capture his gentle soul, his kindness, and his deep and broad intellect. I met Eduardo in 1992 when we both attended the first Society for Vocational Psychology meeting at Michigan State University. I recall meeting with Eduardo and Paula, who is now the dean of your esteemed faculty, one evening at the conference where we chatted about all sorts of ideas, particularly the role of motivation theory in vocational psychology. We developed then a lifelong friendship, and I did not realize that it would be a lifelong friendship that would be so profoundly transformative for me. I was invited to speak at the University of Coimbra for the first time in 1993, and then I invited Eduardo and Paula to spend 2 weeks with me in Albany, New York, in 1994. Eduardo impressed me as a caring and smart colleague who was deeply invested in his work, his family, his colleagues, and his friends. Through my visits to Coimbra, I also met Joaquim Ferreira, who also visited Albany with Eduardo multiple times during the subsequent decades. Developing my friendship with Eduardo and others in the Coimbra community has been one of the major highlights of my adult life. My life expanded considerably via my close friendship with Eduardo, which opened my eyes and heart to the importance of international relationships that matter. Another informative glimpse of our friendship occurred during a visit to Coimbra in 2009, which included a guest. My now wife, Lisa Thayer, who is here in the audience, accompanied me on a visit to this beautiful city relatively early in our courtship. Having Eduardo and Joaquim's support during this period of exploring a romantic relationship in midlife meant a great deal to us. Lisa and I felt that we truly bonded in the warm embrace of Coimbra and of our caring friends. In terms of Eduardo's contributions to our field, I wanted to highlight the work that he did to organize 2 Society for Vocational Psychology conferences here at the University of Coimbra, which Joachim did discuss. He also contributed his impressive knowledge to the development of the decent work scale, which is a central concept in the policy agenda of the International Labor Organization, and for those of you who were at this conference earlier, a core construct in psychology working theory. In addition, Eduardo was way ahead of the field in his commitment to a socially just value system for his work and for our field. I also observed his deep caring for his students and colleagues in countless interactions over the years, both in Portugal and across North America and Europe. Finally, I would like to share an experience that I had with Eduardo and Paula during my first visit to Portugal in 1993, which I think speaks to the wonderful bond that we developed early in our relationship. Paula, I don't know if you remember this, but I hope you do. I recall that we had an amazing dinner at a restaurant that was on the water adjacent to the Padrón dos Descubrimientos, the Monument of the Discoveries, during my last night in Portugal. On the taxi ride back to our hotel, I shared with Eduardo and Paula that their kindness reminded me of a beautiful song lyric from Bob Dylan's classic Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. The line that I shared with them seems to describe Eduardo's soul and Paula's so perfectly. And your gentleness now, which you just can't help but show. Eduardo, I always saw your gentleness. And I was so moved and touched by you. You remain in my heart, and I'll always remember you with love and admiration.
Thank you, David. E passava a palavra ao professor Carlos Gonçalves, que sei também que era um amigo, por quem o Eduardo também tinha uma grande estima. Carlos, também lembro-me de estarmos em tua casa a discutirmos ideias pela noite dentro. Lembro-me perfeitamente, tenho essa memória muito vívida. Obrigado por estares aqui presente.
Obrigado ao Joaquim Armando por termos dado esta oportunidade, este desafio de estar aqui neste grande memorial do Eduardo. Nunca pensei que um dia teria de escrever uma nota tão breve de homenagem a um querido amigo e colega, o Eduardo dos Santos, que partiu inesperadamente em plena atividade da vida docente e da investigação, 65 anos, numa área que nos unia e que nos convocou em debates científicos, em júris de doutoramentos, em júris de mestrado, proporcionando uma oportunidades sublimes de aprendizagem, de convivência, de construção de vínculos muito fortes, de amizade, que vão perdurar para sempre. Porque a constrangida convivência com a finitude da condição humana abre às nossas racionalidades finitas o sentido profundo do eterno. Durante o ano 2023 partiram 3 grandes amigos da área da orientação. O Eduardo, o Luís Imaginário e o meu querido mestre e amigo Joaquim Luís Coimbra. Esta situação criou em mim muitos constrangimentos, porque terem partido, sem se terem despedido de mim, de forma imprevisível, 3 grandes amigos, conferiu em mim uma série de questionamentos, questionamentos vocacionais, inclusive, emergindo a resposta incontornável, chegando a esta conclusão: a vida é mesmo para ser vivida cada dia, e intensamente. Mas hoje quero fazer esta memória de ti, meu querido amigo Eduardo, para reatualizar as memórias dos dias felizes que fomos partilhando, a vida repartida em memórias, de emoções, de rostos, de palavras, de saberes, de sabores, orientado ao longo, que foram fazendo parte das nossas vidas, impregnada muitas vezes por fortes imprevisibilidades e desafios. O Eduardo foi um homem de inabaláveis convicções, empático no seu estilo de comunicação, quer com os colegas, imagino também com os seus alunos. Eu termino esta breve homenagem com a citação adaptada e transformada do nosso grande poeta, Álvaro Campos, porque acho que se adequa perfeitamente ao Eduardo. Seja o que for, valeu a pena ter nascido. Porque de tão interessante que é viver em todos os momentos da vida. A vida chega a doer, a cortar, a roçar, a ranger os dentes, a dar vontade de dar gritos, dar pulos, ficar prostrado e levantar-se de novo. Não sei se ser útil, mesmo sentindo-me, ser prático, ser cotidiano, ser nítido, ter um lugar no mundo, dar sentido à vida. Ter uma obra, uma força, uma vontade, um projeto de vida. Uma razão para descansar, uma necessidade de fruir a vida, uma coisa vinda diretamente da natureza de mim próprio. Sentir tudo e todos, e de todas as maneiras, na diversidade. Viver tudo de todos os lados, ser a mesma pessoa de todos os modos possíveis, ao mesmo tempo, e realizar em mim a humanidade em todos os momentos. Num só momento difuso, profuso, completo, longínquo, mas com marcas do eterno. Multipliquei-me para me sentir. Para me sentir precisei de tudo. Transbordei, tudo o que fiz para me entregar aos outros. Despi-me, entreguei-me totalmente e desgastei-me pelos outros. Há em cada canto da minha alma um espaço para o outro. Eu quero ser sempre aquilo que empatizo. Eu torno-me sempre, mais tarde ou mais cedo, aquilo com quem empatizo. Seja uma pedra ou uma ânsia. Seja uma flor ou uma ideia abstrata. Seja uma multidão ou um modo de compreender a história. Eu simpatizo com tudo. Vivo tudo em tudo. Porque o tudo tem marcas de eternidade. Por isso, meu querido amigo Eduardo, tu és eterno e a tua presença perdurará como um legado de sabedoria, de alegria, de amor, de solidariedade nas vidas que convivestes conosco e aqueles que tu amaste. Obrigado, meu amigo. Continuarás sempre presente na minha vida. Teu amigo Carlos.
Obrigado pelas palavras sentidas, Carlos. Maria João. A professora Maria João, da Faculdade de Psicologia da Universidade de Lisboa, foi co-coordenadora, co-coordenadora, e durante vários anos o Eduardo também co-coordenou o doutoramento interuniversitário em Psicologia da Educação. Passava de palavra.
Eu agradeço terem-me convidado para estar aqui e a existência deste momento de homenagem ao Eduardo de poder lembrar. Eu tenho aqui umas breves palavras. A criação do doutoramento interuniversitário em Psicologia da Educação está inexoravelmente ligada à sua coordenação. Um verdadeiro grupo de 4 mosqueteiros, leais às universidades de Coimbra e de Lisboa, seguindo de uma forma fervorosa o lema de um por todos e todos por um, da qual fez parte o Eduardo durante 15 anos e a qual tenho tido o privilégio de incluir com os meus queridos colegas Joaquim Armando e Ana Margarida, sendo estas palavras também suas, não esquecendo a saudosa professora Adelina. Não tivemos de enfrentar o cardeal Richelieu e, ainda que os nossos desafios tenham sido bem mais manejáveis, o Eduardo era um apoio essencial e sempre presente, disponível para encontrar soluções e levar a qualidade dos argumentos quando se mostraram necessários e, sobretudo, apoiar-nos com o seu olhar, o seu doce, mas simultaneamente interpelador olhar. Fomos verdadeiros caixeiros viajantes, deslocando-nos entre Coimbra e Lisboa para aulas, arguições, reuniões, avaliações e o Eduardo, sempre presente, solidário, atento e disponível. Contribuiu para todos querermos ser a melhor versão de nós mesmos, levando estudantes e colegas para caminhos alternativos e divergentes, procurando que saíssemos das nossas visões psicológicas objetivas, mas limitadas, exortando a integrar os estudos nos seus domínios sociais, culturais e históricos e deixando-nos reflexões menos óbvias nas suas arguições que todos víamos como inspiradoras e nos desinstalavam, deixando-nos mais perguntas que respostas, como deve ser a discussão profícua nestes estudos. Lembro uma homenagem a um professor jubilado e com grande obra da minha faculdade, o professor Pina Prata, e a comoção que senti ao perceber que no final da vida o que tinha significado e contava para aquele homem encontrava-se nas suas relações afetivas. E esta recordação leva-me aos almoços rápidos que tínhamos entre 2 obrigações académicas, onde as trocas nos envolviam inteiros, onde o tempo era pouco para tanto que queríamos partilhar, onde nos encontrávamos mais libertos e cheios de ideias e de vida, e por isso a tocar a alma uns dos outros. Quando uma vez Irving Yalom perguntou a um paciente o que mais tinha retido de uma sessão, antecipando uma troca de ideias que considerara de veras interessante sobre uma nova perspectiva face a um velho problema, foi com a enorme surpresa que ouviu o abraço que me deu no final da consulta. Sim, outros virão depois de nós para continuar as pequenas e as grandes obras, mas a linha invisível, que é o meio efetivo em que foram criadas, é a estrutura intangível para a qual tantas vezes o Eduardo voltava a nossa atenção. E só podemos desejar que a harmonia impere nelas como imperou entre nós. Como no poema da Sofia, outros em abril passarão no pomar, em que tu tantas vezes passaste. Haverá longos poentes sobre o mar, outros amarão as coisas que tu amaste. Obrigada, Eduardo.
Obrigado, Maria João. Eu vou pedir à professora Isabel Festa, isto eu vou-vos dizer sinceramente, Não estão aqui a professora Maria, a professora Isabel Festas e podiam ser outras pessoas. Aqui a Isabel Festas, a professora Isabel Festas também foi colega, como eu fui tu, Eduardo, no primeiro curso. Estão aqui outros colegas que também desse mesmo ano. A professora Graça Guidar está aqui, não sei se... mas vejo aqui, pronto, eu creio que é Graça, não estou a ver aqui. Mas o que é que eu queria aqui dizer? Que só tinha 5 cadeiras, não estão aqui. Foi mesmo aqui a conversar na altura, olhamos, só há aqui 5 cadeiras e era a razão porque são, obviamente, que Isabel estarias aqui connosco e a Elisa também. Foi a questão das cadeiras e eu próprio disse, eu até saio de cá. Mas eu vou-te pedir, Isabel, para, se quiseres, leva o microfone, ou então dizes... Não, eu levo-te. Ou então, faz-me a favor, ou então também podes vir aqui e falar daqui. E depois também pedia.
Eu penso que o Joaquim Armando me contactou, me pediu para estar aqui, porque ele sabe da relação que eu tive ao longo de muitos anos com o Eduardo. Essa relação começou no nosso primeiro ano de curso, passou aí a fotografia. Eu entrei num curso e tive a sorte de fazer parte de um grupo de amigos, de colegas, onde estava também a Graça, aqui presente, e que fazia parte do Eduardo e outro amigo que já foi também no espaço de um ano. Foram 2 desse grupo, o Valentim e agora o Eduardo. E portanto, foi essa a razão e portanto, é com gosto e com pesar ao mesmo tempo que eu aqui estou a falar do Eduardo. De facto, foi uma relação durante muitos anos, depois teve continuidade, partilhei com ele o gabinete algum tempo mais tarde, mas eu gostava talvez de destacar aqui, para o pouco tempo que tenho, 2 coisas que para mim e para o nosso grupo, nós funcionávamos bastante como grupo, fizemos muitos trabalhos juntos e aqui o trabalho de facto estava aliado a uma relação de amizade. Fizemos muitos trabalhos, estudávamos muito, mas também nos divertíamos, convivíamos e fazíamos longas tertúlias. Desses tempos, eu penso que o que era distintivo no Eduardo, nesse grupo, um grupo constituído também por pessoas, como já disse, uma delas também já foi, que se destacava pelo seu brilhantismo, mas o Eduardo tinha uma particularidade. O Eduardo era alguém que tinha um pensamento muito organizado, um pensamento muito estruturado, mas que simultaneamente conseguia fazer ligações imprevisíveis, algumas inusitadas. A Graça que está aqui, que fazia parte desse grupo, costumava dizer: o Eduardo é uma caixinha de surpresas. Ele estava-nos sempre a surpreender por uma capacidade enorme que tinha de, dentro de um pensamento muito organizado, havia uma frase, havia um texto que o desorganizava, mas que fazia sentido porque eram ligações muito criativas. Para mim, o Eduardo tinha um pensamento divergente. Era um pensamento onde havia ligações que nós nunca tínhamos pensado. E era assim nos trabalhos académicos, na parte mais científica, mas era assim também no dia-a-dia, nas nossas tertúlias, nas nossas conversas, nos nossos jantares. O Eduardo surpreendia-nos sempre por uma ligação que fazia e que nós não estávamos à espera. Havia outra característica no Eduardo que eu penso que estava relacionada com esta. O Eduardo era de nós todos o mais reservado. Havia ali uma reserva que se destacava. Era um grande amigo, era um grande colega, mas ao mesmo tempo ele era muito reservado. Havia ali uma interioridade a que eu nunca tive acesso. E eu fazia uma ligação entre essa interioridade, um mundo que para mim era um mundo, um imaginário muito rico, e aquela capacidade que ele tinha de fazer ligações que nós não estávamos à espera, faziam parte desse seu mundo. Enfim, era como se o Eduardo era alguém que estava próximo daquilo que o Italo Calvino apontou como sendo uma das propostas para o milénio, a multiplicidade. Parecia que ele estava mais próximo de captar a multiplicidade das coisas do que eu, pelo menos do que eu. Enfim, muito brevemente para terminar, e enfim, em jeito de compensar esta perda do Eduardo, assim como foi também a do Valentim, e falo dos dois porque eles estavam muito ligados, aliás, aparecem ali juntos na fotografia. Eu penso, para compensar, cada um tem os seus mecanismos, são mecanismos que não resultam muito bem, porque nunca se compensa, mas cada um serve daqueles que tem. Eu dou comigo a pensar que fui uma privilegiada, porque aos 18 anos entrei num curso e tive, de facto, a sorte de trabalhar com um grupo de pessoas que me deixaram marcas e que terminaram, em grande parte, todo o caminho que fiz até hoje, já lá vão muitos anos. De facto, claro que nós temos nunca queremos ser um pouco assim, talvez não o consigamos, mas pelo menos fica-nos uma vontade de valorizar este tipo de pessoas e aquilo que elas representam, a sua forma de estar na vida, a sua forma de pensar, de viver, de conviver com os outros. Isso devo ao Eduardo também, devo ao Eduardo uma parte daquilo que ele era, que era o único ali naquele grupo. Por isto que eu disse, fico a dever muito a esse grupo com quem convivi, com quem trabalhei e de quem fui e sou hoje ainda muito amiga. Penso que este legado o Eduardo deixou a toda a gente, penso que deixou à faculdade de uma forma mais ou menos visível, de uma forma mais ou menos consciente, mas havia ali uma maneira de estar, de ser, de viver, de pensar, que de facto era a única neste sentido, de ter ali uma capacidade, era muito criativo, Eduardo. Isso ficou em nós, em mim ficou e penso que ficou um pouco em toda a gente. Portanto, tenho que agradecer ao Eduardo e penso que a faculdade também lhe está agradecida. Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, Isabel, pelas tuas palavras e também que sei que são sinceras e honestas e também por nos trazeres aqui o Valentim, que sei que está, a Graça está mesmo aí por trás e, de certa forma estamos também aqui a lembrar-nos do Valentim. E eu também pedi à Elisa, porque eu sei que o Eduardo também tinha a Elisa numa estima muito grande e pedi à Elisa, que me disse inicialmente, eu até que não, mas não precisei de pedir muito, e obrigado, Elisa, porque eu pedi porque eu sei que ele tinha uma estima muito grande.
E eu, portanto, vou ser breve. Eu tive o privilégio de privar com o professor Eduardo Santos enquanto colaboradora desta casa, mas também como aluna da licenciatura em Psicologia. E guardo o professor Eduardo umas qualidades excepcionais, humanas e excelente profissional. E vou guardar sempre na minha memória um grande ser humano e que foi para mim um privilégio ter conhecido o professor Eduardo Santos, quer como colaboradora, quer como aluna da licenciatura em Psicologia, e sou-lhe imensamente grata por tudo o que nós partilhamos, as nossas conversas e sempre a disponibilidade dele para nos ouvir. Obrigada.
Pronto, muito obrigado. Nós temos aqui um vídeo preparado. Convidei uma série de colegas de vários países, sobretudo nos Estados Unidos, onde nós colaboramos muito, como eu vos disse, na Sociedade de Psicologia Vocacional e nos congressos da Associação Americana de Psicologia ao longo dos anos. Portanto, nós vamos nos dirigir para vermos os vídeos, mas eu queria, porque não me enviou um vídeo, porque não estava a conseguir enviar, eu próprio não estava a conseguir abrir, que é de um colega e amigo, o Graham Steed, that I was not able to download the video, but because he could not send it for some reason, because we were having difficulties, but then he sent me a small text that I'm going to read. Okay, and then we will go and see the videos, and I thank Diogo and Miguel for really the job that they did, because without them we would be showing a video in this way and the other one the other way, and now they prepared it nicely. So thank you, Diogo and Miguel. And I'm going to read the words from Graham Steed from Cleveland State University, a professor in Ohio. I am Graham Steed from Cleveland, Ohio. I was very sad to hear of Eduardo passing last year. I knew him for about 20 years or so through our mutual interest in career psychology. I would often have dinner with him during American Psychological Association conventions. I visited Portugal twice, 1991 and 2003, and second time I spent time with Eduardo at the Society for Vocational Psychology conference in Coimbra. He was very congenial, often talking about his trips to Brazil, and was always willing to have a good laugh, it is true. While he was a highly respected academic in career psychology, I considered him a good friend. In fact, Joaquim Ferreira and Eduardo were often together, and it was always a pleasure conversing with them, recalling the good times and talking about the present and future. I miss Eduardo. My sincere sympathies go to Eduardo's family. Best, Graham. So, thank you, Graham. He's not here. So we'll go now. And we'll be watching videos from different colleagues around the world.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Martin, a counseling psychologist and former faculty member at the University at Albany, in Albany, New York. I'm still at the University at Albany and now in a research role. I'm honored to say a few words about Eduardo. I met Eduardo first in 2007 when I was a doctoral student in counseling psychology at the University at Albany and traveled to the University of Coimbra for the first joint conference in psychology between the University at Albany and the University of Coimbra. And that conference at the time was arranged by Joaquim, Eduardo, and my former colleague, friend, and mentor, Dick Case, from the University of Albany.
I met Eduardo several more times at the University of Albany when he would travel there to collaborate and work
with Dick Case and with Joaquim. And then I met him twice more at the University of Coimbra for the second and third joint conferences between our universities held in 2012 and in 2019.
Eduardo struck me as a humble man with a big heart. I'm sure he had a major impact on the lives of his
I really appreciate the opportunity to say just a few words about Eduardo during this special remembrance. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Rachel Gally-Cinnamon from Tel Aviv University. I was deeply sorry and shocked to hear about the death of Eduardo. I remember him from APA conventions and SVP conventions. I remember his talks about career development from international perspectives, very high quality of research. I will remember him as a good researcher, colleague, and friend. Thank you.
Meu nome é Joana Vilhena, eu sou coordenadora do Laboratório Interdisciplinar de Pesquisa e Intervenção Social da PUC-Rio. Eu me sinto muito honrada de poder participar dessa homenagem ao professor Eduardo Santos, que nos deixou tão cedo. O Eduardo deixou um grande legado para nós no Departamento de Psicologia da PUC, não só das pesquisas sobre o envelhecimento, como uma profunda troca que nós pudemos desenvolver em várias outras áreas do conhecimento. Eduardo aprendeu na Universidade de Coimbra alguns dos nossos alunos que fizeram pesquisas em seu doutorado sanduíches, alguns alunos, inclusive da graduação, que ele gentilmente orientou nesse início de pesquisa que poucos professores têm disponibilidade de fazer. Nossas provas foram intensas, não só acadêmicas, como afetivas. Eu tive a honra de poder prefaciar um de seus livros. Eduardo participou de várias de nossas coletâneas. Eu fui convidada por inúmeras vezes a participar dos vários congressos que ele organizou. Ou seja, uma troca intensa, não só afetiva, como acadêmica. Lamento muito a sua partida, mas, por outro lado, acho que foi uma riqueza imensa poder ter convivido com essa pessoa que tanto contribuiu para a academia e para o desenvolvimento desse nosso intercâmbio afetivo e intelectual. Muito obrigada pelo convite, Eduardo, você vai fazer falta, mas, por um outro lado, você deixou um grande legado com seus amigos e com seus seguidores.
Olá a todas e a todos. Conheci o professor Eduardo Santos há mais de 3 décadas e tive o privilégio de, com ele, partilhar a vida académica, científica e profissional sob diferentes papéis, nomeadamente como professor, como colega de ensino e investigação e, fundamentalmente, como amigo. Recordo com grande presença o prazer e a surpresa científica com que desfrutei e, confesso, com um misto de admiração e a percepção de alguma ignorância do meu lado, quando pela primeira vez li o seu trabalho de doutoramento, Tempo, Afeto e Projeto, a atitude afetiva face ao futuro pessoal como preditor de variações no funcionamento motivacional. Recordo também a satisfação que tive, anos mais tarde, na leitura da sua lição de educação. No papel de professor, os primeiros contactos ocorreram com o professor Eduardo Santos, à data assistente na Faculdade de Psicologia e Ciências da Educação da Universidade de Coimbra, e eu, estudante da licenciatura na mesma faculdade, compartilhava o seu saber com aqueles que iniciavam a descoberta do que é a ciência psicológica. Mais tarde, partilhamos o interesse pela investigação nas questões do trabalho, carreira e bem-estar, sob diferentes formas, tendo integrado o centro de investigação que coordenava e a linha de investigação que liderava, em conjunto com o professor Joaquim Armando Ferreira, e a quem agradeço o convite e a oportunidade destas palavras. Ainda como docente do ensino superior, é viva a memória do Eduardo Santos, colega sempre disponível para acolher, para ajudar, para orientar, para contribuir para a inclusão e para o desenvolvimento do outro, fosse quem fosse o outro. A título pessoal, recordo com enorme gratidão a sua disponibilidade para comigo colaborar na elaboração do conteúdo programático de uma disciplina para o curso de Psicologia da Universidade do Algarve e, nesse âmbito, inclusive, facultar um conjunto de materiais, alguns dos quais ainda hoje constituem referências de apoio ao estudo dos meus alunos. É exatamente nestes valores de partilha, de ajuda pelos outros, de desprendimento com a posse da coisa e interessado no crescimento e no bem-estar de todos, que recordo com saudade o amigo Eduardo Santos. Estou grato com a oportunidade que as trajetórias das nossas vidas possibilitaram, permitindo-me desfrutar do seu saber e, fundamentalmente, da sua amizade. Obrigado, Eduardo.
Sou João Pedro Gaspar, sou investigador, docente, supervisor de casos de acolhimento, de social, e o professor Eduardo é uma base muito importante para todo este curso, desde que o conheci. O professor Eduardo, além do mestre, orientou-me doutoramento, um amigo, alguém que me impulsionou a criar a PAGES, a plataforma de apoio a jovens ex-acolhidos, que recentemente recebeu o prémio de desenvolvimento da Administração Pública, e é um momento que eu gostava muito que alguém que foi o primeiro vice-presidente da Associação pudesse estar presente para testemunhar isso mesmo. É o nosso sócio honorário e muita caminho dos jovens. Por isso, Eduardo, mesmo nos momentos em que necessitava da unidade de cuidados continuados, uma pessoa que tinha como imagem de marca uma lucidez impressionante, uma perspicácia e o pensamento livre. Falávamos muitas vezes, falávamos de tudo e de nada, das vantagens da anarquia, àquela cor amarela torrada do edifício da Cegueira, e são todos esses momentos, são todas essas vivências, essas emoções que fazem dele uma pessoa que mereça muito que todos nós consigamos perpetuar aquilo que ele nos transmitiu. Da minha parte, transmitiu muito enquanto sábio e conhecedor, mas também, e não é isso menos, enquanto pessoa e enquanto personalidade que de alguma maneira tenta replicar aquilo que eu lamento muito não conseguir estar aí para testemunhar as emoções que estarão a ser vividas neste momento. Da minha parte, envio-vos um forte abraço com o mesmo valor que a amizade que nos une e que nos vai unir para sempre.
José Barroso conheci o professor Eduardo Santos nas tertulias entre amigos, no fim da tarde, que tinham inicialmente como ponto de encontro no Café Oásis. Mais tarde, passamos para o Lino, nas escadas de Quebra-Costas. Depressa depreendi que estava na presença de um excelente amigo, de um excelente companheiro, de um brilhante profissional, talentoso, com uma personalidade multifacetada, de uma genialidade e de uma disponibilidade enorme para os amigos e para quem com ele lidava de perto. Tantas vezes estivemos em desacordo na discussão de diversos temas mediáticos, onde imperou sempre a lucidez, a serenidade e a humildade deste ilustre amigo. Acreditou sempre que vencia a doença até o último dia. A morte levou demasiado cedo, impedindo de concretizar vários projetos da sua vida e profissionais que tinha em mente. As muitas e diversas lembranças da nossa vivência perdurarão para sempre gravadas no lado doce da memória. Até sempre, amigo.
Olá, chamo-me Karina Teixeira e estou a fazer este vídeo para prestar a minha sentida homenagem ao professor Dr. Eduardo Santos. O professor Eduardo Santos foi uma das pessoas mais importantes na minha carreira. Foi uma pessoa que acreditou em mim quando eu própria não acreditava. Conheci o professor Eduardo no início da minha carreira. O início de uma carreira em psicologia é difícil e eu estava numa situação de emprego precária. O professor Eduardo encorajou-me a concorrer a uma bolsa de doutoramento da Fundação para a Ciência e a Tecnologia. E a verdade é que se não fosse o seu encorajamento, eu não o teria feito. Do professor Eduardo eu guardo as melhores memórias. A sua paixão pela profissão era inspiradora. Lembro-me que os seus olhos brilhavam quando se discutiam novos projetos. Os anos passavam e, mesmo com os desafios que acredito que a carreira por vezes lhe tenha colocado, a sua paixão e amor pela psicologia e pela academia continuavam inabaláveis. Pelo professor Eduardo eu tenho a maior gratidão. Após ter terminado o doutoramento, os anos passavam e o professor Eduardo continuava sempre a torcer e a celebrar as minhas conquistas, quer académicas, quer fora da academia, por exemplo, as minhas conquistas e as minhas aventuras musicais. Eduardo Santos, o professor e o amigo que ficará para sempre no meu coração. Muito obrigada. Muito obrigada, professor.
Hola a todos y todas. Meu nome é Fernando Fallardo, profesor do Departamento de Psicologia da Universidade de Extremadura, da Espanha. Queria dizer umas breves palavras sobre Eduardo Santos, uma pessoa maravillosa, generosa, uma pessoa que todos nós queríamos e un amigo con unha porta aberta sempre para todos nós. Tamén un exemplo de investigador, de pesquisador, sempre procurando demostrar a ciência verdadeira y tratando de ayudar a las personas más jóvenes. En fin, una persona que todos nos sentimos a su falta, mas ficará sempre con una sonrisa en nuestra memoria y como un exemplo da referencia ética de como facer as coisas bem e sempre uma referência pessoal. Todos nós lembramos de él y mandamos un forte abraço para a família e todos os colegas. Abraço de coração.
Cumprimento a todos e a todas que assistem a esse vídeo, nessa merecida cerimônia de homenagem póstuma ao saudoso professor Dr. Eduardo Santos. Agradeço também a lembrança do meu nome para participar desta cerimônia. Fui apresentado ao Dr. Eduardo Santos por um professor português que ministrava aulas num curso que eu dirigia aqui na cidade de Santos, estado de São Paulo, Brasil. A ideia era de se criar uma parceria com a Universidade de Coimbra e a instituição em que trabalhava, a fim de possibilitar intercâmbio entre os professores e alunos de ambas as instituições. Desde 2009 passamos a ter conversas quase que diárias, via WhatsApp e outros meios de comunicação eletrônica, na expectativa de firmarmos essa parceria. Por essa ocasião, foi possibilitada a alguns dos nossos professores realizar seu doutoramento junto à Faculdade de Psicologia e Ciência da Educação da Universidade de Coimbra. Curso esse coordenado pelo professor Dr. Joaquim Armando e auxiliado pelo professor Dr. Eduardo Santos. No grupo de professores que aceitou esse desafio estava eu incluído. Era para mim um motivo de orgulho adentrar em uma instituição da qual desde criança sempre ouvia meu avô, que era português, a falar nos capas pretas de Coimbra, aludindo ao traje utilizado pelos alunos e professores dessa instituição. Quis o destino que, sendo o professor Eduardo Santos, o orientador, que eu não pudesse contar com sua importante participação em minha defesa de tese, visto que veio a falecer pouco tempo antes de ela ocorrer. Ficou-me o exemplo de um ser humano sincero, competente, culto e respeitoso, e que sabia conversar com as pessoas, entendendo as características de cada uma delas, não deixando de dar atenção e sendo direto nas suas intervenções dentro do respeito e compreensão que todos os seres humanos merecem. Por ocasião da minha defesa de tese, tive a oportunidade de externar meu profundo sentimento pela perda do meu orientador, mas, mais do que isso, de um amigo que aprendi a admirar. Que ele esteja descansando em paz em sua morada definitiva. Meu agradecimento a ele por tudo que conseguimos e meu lamento pelo que não conseguimos. Quero terminar agradecendo também ao professor Dr. Joaquim Armando, que presidiu minha banca avaliadora, pelo respeito e atenção a mim dispensado. Fico feliz em ter mais um amigo em terra lusitana. Muito obrigado e recebo o meu fraterno abraço.
Hello, my name is Nadja Fouet. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I'm very sad for the reason that I'm joining you here today, but also very honored to get a chance to say a few words about my friend and colleague, Eduardo Santos. I first met Eduardo. I'm a longtime member of the Society of Vocational Psychology, and I first met him when he came to the United States to go to American Psychological Association conference and came to the various meetings for the Society for Vocational Psychology. And he and Joachim came up with the idea, and I actually don't know, maybe other people were involved, probably David Blustein, to sponsor a conference for the vocational psychologists to go and join them at the University of Coimbra, which was marvelous to go to such a beautiful setting. And we went, my memory is we went twice, but then we always had a marvelous time and lots of laughter and lots of, again, a beautiful setting, wonderful food. We went to the Porto, and we were able to travel around and see the beautiful Portuguese countryside. But then one time, Eduardo and Joaquim invited me to come back for a week. I was the editor of the Counseling Psychologist, and spend a week in the University of Coimbra and meeting with students and faculty about articles that they wanted to publish, as I was the editor again of the Counseling Psychologist. And I had a marvelous week there, and Joaquim and Eduardo, and particularly Eduardo, couldn't have been nicer to leave their families and come and spend the time with me and take me to dinner and make sure I had a good time and had a wonderful time to be with friends, and lots of, again, wonderful meals and time to talk about ideas and talk about the ways that the educational system was different in Portugal and the United States, and generate some research ideas. And it was really just a marvelous memory. And I'm very, very sorry for the loss, and I treasure the time that I had with him. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, 2 weeks ago, Joaquim wrote me an email and asked me to contribute a small video for a ceremony remembering Eduardo Santos. The first thing coming to my mind was Eduardo is retiring, and the department is collecting impressions about his career and scientific achievements at the University of Coimbra, and is preparing a farewell party honoring him with these collegial souvenirs. To be sure what to say, I asked Joaquim for the occasion of this enterprise. The answer really shocked me. I wouldn't have imagined that Eduardo had passed away even more than a year ago. It made me sad. What can I say? I met Eduardo and Joaquim for the first time in Chicago in March 2008, where Fred Mondrasek, Eric Porfelli, and I had a symposium at SRA, and our Portuguese colleagues joined the International Counseling Psychology Conference that took place at the same venue. Fred introduced me to Eduardo and Joaquim, and from then on, a fruitful scientific relationship, and what counts even more, a deep friendship developed at breakneck speed. I come back to this term in a different context later. In July 2008, we met again in Berlin at the International Congress of Psychology, where Eduardo and Joaquim invited Fred and me to Coimbra. As soon as in April 2009, we all met in Coimbra, where Eduardo and Joaquim welcomed us with an overwhelming hospitality. In October 2009, we all went to the Azores for a conference, Aging in the 21st Century. Afterwards, I met Eduardo and Joaquim in Coimbra many times. The highlight of our cooperation was our joint editorship of the book Career Development in Context, Festschrift for Fred von Dratzek, on which we had worked from 2014 to 2018, when the book was ultimately launched. Over and beyond the professional collaboration, let me drop some words about Eduardo as a friend. Eduardo was always a lovely and humorous company. We laughed a lot together, he was witty, made remarks with a twinkle in his eye, and was simply good company. He always showed us his bright side and seemed carefree. Coming back to breakneck speed, in April 2009, Eduardo took Fred, Joaquim, and me for a ride to the mountains with his car. It was a marvelous excursion with a fantastic view from the top. The path led over a narrow, unpaved road with tight curves. That was okay, as long as we went uphill. On the way back, Eduardo used gravity, put the car in fourth gear and let the car roll, making conversation with us in a completely calm voice. Fred and I almost died for fear, and Eduardo carefree and fearless. It is not just that he passed away at an age at which one can look forward to a carefree post-retirement life stage. I'll miss Eduardo as colleague and buddy. God bless you.
It is an honor and privilege to be able to participate in celebrating the life of Eduardo Santos, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a few comments. I don't remember when I first met Eduardo. It may have been at the meeting of the International Association of Applied Psychology, which took place in Lisbon in 1991. Over the years, I met Eduardo on numerous occasions in Coimbra, as well as at scientific meetings in other countries, always in the company of his friend and colleague Joaquim Ferreira. In fact, it was their friendship that revealed to me one of the qualities that I came to value in Eduardo, namely his unwavering loyalty. My own experience was that no matter how long it had been since we had seen each other, he was always warmly welcoming. In addition to valuing Eduardo as a friend, I also respected him as an accomplished and scientific collaborator. Despite his accomplishments, during our collaborations, Eduardo was always modest and unassuming. In other words, he was a consummate team player. I greatly enjoyed working with him on a number of projects and on several well-received publications. Although my contacts with Eduardo were sporadic, as we often did not see each other for a year or longer, his welcoming attitude and warmth toward me was always evident. The last time I saw Eduardo was in Coimbra in 2018, when he and Joaquim Ferreira and Matthias Reitzle gave me the great honor of a Festschrift, which they had edited and produced in my honor. Today, I cannot think about Coimbra and my dear colleagues and friends there without thinking fondly of Eduardo Santos. He will not be forgotten.
Como diretora da Faculdade de Psicologia, só posso reforçar os testemunhos falam por si, tanto do ponto de vista nacional como internacional, do ponto de vista pessoal como profissional. Foram várias as homenagens que foram feitas ao colega Eduardo Santos. Eu queria realçar um aspecto que a colega Isabel Festas há pouco falou. O Eduardo foi do primeiro curso desta faculdade, enquanto aluno, primeiro curso de estudantes, tal como Joaquim Armando, tal como o Valentim Alferes, que já hoje falámos, e tal como o Valentim, como Joaquim Armando, do primeiro curso de docentes, que foram também ainda nossos docentes. Ele foi meu orientador de estágio. Não posso falar do Eduardo, eu neste momento vou despir o papel de diretora, para mim o papel de colega e amiga. O Eduardo foi meu orientador de estágio, juntamente com a Lígia Mexia Leitão e a Isabel Fernandes, e quando entrei no núcleo de orientação escolar e profissional, ele foi também um dos fundadores desse núcleo de orientação escolar e profissional, que acompanhou a entrada dos psicólogos na escola, que estão aqui várias caras, e acompanhou os trabalhos e o trabalho do núcleo de orientação que foi fundado pelo professor Manuel Viegas Abreu desde o início. Está aqui o Lourdes Mateus, que trabalhou connosco desde o início também e que certamente se recorda e está também, e queria transportar a Lourdes para aqui, porque eu sei que a Lourdes é alguém porque ele tinha uma grande consideração e amizade e que certamente também tem uma consideração e amizade por ele. Queria só como amiga e como colega realçar aquilo que o professor David Blustein hoje disse. What you said today, David, is very true. Work and relationships are deeply intertwined, and Eduardo and I, in the last few months, I remembered, I talked with him a lot a lot more than in many years, especially in the last few years. And we talked a lot of our friendship in the beginning, how we met, what we first worked together in our faculty, our friendship, our going to each other's houses, our children playing together, our deep interests. Sergio here, remember that his doctoral dissertation is about time attitude. I was also interested, and this was Professor Manuel Viegas Abreu influence about time perspective. So that influences that brought us together since the beginning, our joint interest, and that's why we went to see you, and why we approached you in the first time. It was our joint interests in the thematic career, motivational aspects in the thematic area, and so I would just, words are not, as palavras não são mais necessárias. Eu, como diretora da faculdade, como colega, como amiga, gostaria de tornar, digamos assim, reforçar tudo aquilo que foi dito por todos. Certamente o Eduardo, um dos primeiros alunos, um dos primeiros docentes que foram alunos desta faculdade, deixará a sua memória aqui, sempre, nos colegas e nos amigos que conheceu, nos trabalhos que ele nos deixou, sobretudo trabalhos pioneiros numa área em que nós os dois também trabalhamos, a área do aconselhamento de carreira, a área do desenvolvimento de carreira, e outras relacionadas, e como diretora gostaria que isso ficasse hoje bem claro e bem presente. O Eduardo foi, digamos assim, um dos pioneiros numa das nossas áreas, e teve contribuições absolutamente originais que permanecerão para, digamos, como marca, uma das marcas identitárias desta faculdade, e permanecerão aqui no nosso espólio, material e imaterial, que foi muito que foi hoje discutido aqui. Sobretudo como amiga e colega dele, gostaria de deixar que, de facto, os primeiros encontros, digamos, enquanto colega e enquanto amiga, tornaram-se muito, muito presentes nos últimos momentos, tanto em mim como nele. Foram objeto das nossas conversas em vários sítios, infelizmente não muito felizes, mas que Eduardo, nestes últimos momentos, encontrar algum significado para muitos acontecimentos. Ele gostava muito de falar dos primeiros anos, do que nós tínhamos juntos vivido, os primeiros momentos na faculdade, os primeiros momentos de construção para o qual ele contribuiu, de construção desta faculdade, e gostaria hoje de reforçar que esse é um aspecto material e imaterial que ficará para sempre na nossa memória e na nossa história.